So if we could do introductions as we usually do, maybe your name, institution you're at, and I don't know, what are you doing this weekend? Get started. So I'm Virginia. Hello. I'm one of the two people working with this book club. I'm at Miami University. I'm a graduate assistant here in the Office of Community Engagement and Service. And something I'm doing this weekend is my graduate program at Miami University. We're having a retreat, and we are SAHI, Student Affairs in Higher Education. So it's called SAHI, and I'm pretty excited for that. Yeah. Popcorn Carol.
Okay. Hi, I'm Carol, and I go to Michigan State University. I am a career advisor at the Career Services Network here. Let's see, what am I doing this weekend? I might go to a football game, or I might have too much homework, so we'll see. We'll see. Okay. Popcorn, Steven.
Hello, everyone. My name is Steven Dedrick. I am a PhD student at Ohio State and also work in our Multicultural Center. And this weekend, I am going to a Columbus Crew match, so it will be my first professional soccer match. So that'll be interesting. Popcorn Peter.
Hi everyone, my name is Peter Lim Tongvirat, and I am at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis as the coordinator for social justice education. And this weekend I'm going to go back to Chicago for this community event that infuses art, hip hop, and social justice. And the theme for the event will be it will be about police brutality. So, yeah. Oh, I forgot the popcorn. Popcorn, Mindy.
Hey folks, I'm Mindy. I'm also a graduate student at Miami University of Ohio. I work with diversity initiatives within the College of Education, Health, and Society. And I will actually be one of the facilitators for a wonderful SA treat this weekend for our program. So that's what I'll be doing. Popcorn Ramona.
Hi everyone, sorry I'm a few minutes late. My name is Ramona Gupta. I am the coordinator of Asian American Cultural Affairs at Columbia College, Chicago. And the question is, what are we doing this weekend? Yeah. I'm hanging out with family, which I'm very much looking forward to. Did anybody else not go yet?
No, that's it.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. So we got some good stuff going on this weekend. A little bit of homework, but then a little bit of playtime. So to get started with our book club, this month we read chapter 4 and 5. So we're going to start with chapter 4, and my questions are very quick. So the first part was, what are your thoughts on Kim's 1981 Stages of Identity Development for Asian Americans? That's in the chapter. So I specifically chose the very first model that was discussed because it was from 1981, and I thought it was kind of interesting that there's one that's pretty old, and I was wondering if there are others, like new ones, in which people more identified with, or do you think that one from 1981 is still sufficient? Like, does it speak to your experiences? And I can read them. So stage 1 is ethnic awareness. Stage 2 is white identification. Stage 3 is awakening to social political consciousness. Stage 4 is redirection to an Asian American consciousness. And stage 5 is incorporation. And this is on page 96.
So I guess I'll start.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, not okay. So I'm not really sure how I feel about stage models anymore because I feel like it is good to show a progression, but at the same time, I feel sometimes as if like especially with stage 2, I'm really curious about whether people think that we still have this white identification versus like more of like a maybe American, and whether American means white, I'm not really sure, but like identification and what that means. So I'm not really sure if that exactly applies in this day and age anymore. I mean, it might if other people have other opinions, but another thing is this study was based on like second generation Japanese American women. So I think as a whole, it's hard to say whether or not like all of this applies to everybody. And then I did a study on I did like a student stories project on Asian American identity development for some students here at Michigan State. And for me, I felt like family background and also like their kind of experiences in college have a lot more to do with their identity development than some of this awareness stuff that Kim mentioned. But I don't know. What do y'all think?
Also to clarify, I chose this because it was like it builds off, so I don't mean to focus only on this, but yeah. To answer one of your questions about like stage 2 and the white identification, it's interesting because I feel as if I do go through, or I did, and I sometimes still do go through that in terms of like, so I'm a very fair-skinned, and there have been times when people have been like, oh, are you like half white? And then I don't know why, but I would be like, I would be very happy about that. And then I think it's because like growing up, my family was very focused on, they would say that, the lighter skin you have, the better it is. And I don't know if that was like a result, I'm sure it is, as a result of, like whiteness is better. So it's very strange, but yes.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I've actually had someone tell me on the phone that I sound very white too, which is very interesting, but I don't know what that means, so.
I think so when I originally read it, I think there were a lot of ways where I identified with the model, but that was also because of my context growing up. My family was for the first 7 years of my life, my family was the only family of color in my neighborhood, period. And so I think for me as a young individual, not understanding cultural like norms and culture and what culture was, I went with what I could see. So there's a part of me that wonders. I'm also curious about the wording because I think a lot of it is, for me as I grew up, it was more of an awareness, not necessarily that I looked different, but an awareness that some of the cultural norms and traditions around my family were different, which I don't think growing up I necessarily automatically associated with what was visible, but rather just stories around celebrations and holidays, and I just knew in school like I didn't really fit. And so I agree, I don't really like stage models because I think it inherently assumes a very linear progression, and I think with identity development it's not a very linear process by any means, and I can actually see myself like going through this process multiple times, especially as I grew in my understanding of myself and what is culture, and just wasn't only looking at what was visible anymore. And so and I think that's the other thing about models too, like they're kind of like a guiding framework, but they certainly don't speak to everybody's unique experience. But I will say I experienced, Carol, similar tensions as you, and I also see how I acknowledge that the theory could also be used as a framework to guide understanding. I think it would just be a very limited understanding.
I think Danny just joined us. So hi, Danny. We were just asking about your thoughts on Kim's 1981 stages of identity development.
um, is theories and counter I remember when I was uh,
Peter, I can't hear you. You're going in and out a lot. Peter, I can't hear you. You're going in and out a lot. Do you? Is off, but we still can't hear you very well. It's okay, technical difficulties, it happens. So then, moving on, how was your journey in comparison to this? And then I know the chapter moves on to multiracial identity development. Is that something that people identify with more? Was there any other type of model that wasn't mentioned in the chapter? Sorry, Peter, it was very choppy. I don't know, I couldn't hear anything you said.
Do you want me to try to repeat myself, or I don't know what you heard at all, so I'm just guessing maybe we could just move on to the next question.
No, so we had just asked a new question, but what were you going to? I'm curious, Peter, what you were going to ask.
Oh, I guess my critique of the model is that there is it's a bit of a monolithic like definition of what is Asian American identity, and I mean on so many different levels. Like that, first off, it's a very monoracial model. We're not talking about different experiences from East Asian Americans, South Asians, Southeast Asian Americans. We're not talking about immigration patterns, like how have people's immigration stories affect their identification with their identity. Where are they are they coming from like a refugee background, or are they coming here as an affluent, like their parents having more, like, being highly educated and immigrating here. So I think those are just different things that I thought I think expand upon the existing theory. But I just do want to point out one extra thing. Like I think the idea of, like I agree with like the whole models being, or stages being rigid, and I like the idea of like salience, and how does salience affect where you identify, how you identify. I think I remember reading, I don't know how to say his last name, but Sam Musaeus, he had a theory on that, on Southeast Asian American refugees identity development model. So yeah, I don't know if you heard all that, but okay.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I think especially when you consider the date of the date that kind of model was created, it's I still see it a lot, but I think it's more true probably of the second generation folks whose parents immigrated here, you know, in the 60s, right, after the 1965 Immigration Act. And so, and it makes sense, I think, for that generation of folks. I'm part of that generation, right, of the children of the people who immigrated in the 60s. And a lot of that model resonates with me, and I think with a lot of people my age. But beyond that, all the things that Peter said, I think really point out the weaknesses in that kind of a model, especially for the students that we're working with today.
So yeah, I mean, I think one thing about stage models, like we've said already, and that's what I appreciate about the next model that they talk about, Ren's patterns, not stages, which as a biracial person, I very much identify with that model a lot more. And I can see at different points in my life, and thinking about what we just talked about with contextual identity, and that it is situational, and that definitely affects the different stages and stage models, but also like what are those patterns of identifying. Yeah, I can see how that changed throughout my life of growing up in California, but then moving and attending a PWI, and how moving through those spaces, my identity has shifted, and what does that mean when I'm at NASPA even, and in the APIKC and in these spaces of moving through that identity and trying to kind of navigate that myself, while other people are probably trying to figure out my identity as well, a lot of the time. So yeah, I definitely identify with that a lot more. Appreciate calling it patterns. Maybe that's something else other models can start to adopt, of not stages, because not everything is linear, like we just talked about. So yeah.
I really appreciate the critiques that you all are bringing up about the very old model. So I think that's a great point that, I chose it because it was an earlier one, but just wanted to see how it progressed. And thanks to Stephen for letting us know that, you identify more, and it's challenging in navigating spaces, even like this one. So moving on a little bit. I really liked how they broke down the, I guess the phases and like to family life, undergrad years, grad school, professional experience, and wanted to know about people's thoughts on how they see themselves in their life by breaking their experiences down by like those types of phases. Like did grad school help? Did undergrad help? Professional life, etc.
Sorry, Virginia, can you repeat that one more time? Just the last part.
Did she freeze? Okay, I think she froze. So I think what Virginia is asking folks to share is kind of, so if we explore the different patterns that are talked about, and specifically the breaking down where they talk about like the different components of life, so family life versus undergraduate years versus graduate school versus professional experience, like if folks would be open to sharing, like, did they resonate with some of the things that were shared? Did they feel like they have a different experience? Or how would they see that if we were to hypothetically break into these different spheres, even though all these spheres do in some ways merge together? Does that help, Ramona?
So I guess I could start. I mean, I think that a lot of that made sense to me. I think for me, my undergraduate years, like I just mentioned, was a lot of identity exploration in terms of my mixed identity, because it was the first time that it was called into question, I would say. And so that was, a lot of dissonance for me and trying to figure out what that meant. Being in a new space where there were not a lot of mixed people or a lot of API people in general, just being different from Southern California. And then I think that graduate school helped affirm that identity from a theoretical standpoint, I suppose. So like we read Ren and all sorts of identity development models in my master's program, and so I was like able to see like, okay, like now I can see what I just went through from a more academic standpoint. And then in the profession, I think that someone in the interviews talked about like not really feeling welcomed, or like that the staff or faculty or just the community at the university was like unprepared for just knowing what to do with a mixed person. But I think that would go for many communities of color in general. But yeah, I think that I, as one of two API people, and I think the only mixed person, kind of pushed that agenda forward more for others to like see, here's what we need to be learning about our students, and like we need to do this reading, whether that is just kind of more just reading stories or experiences from people or students, or academic reading about it, because not everyone has a student affairs background, so not everyone is coming in with this knowledge of like, okay, we know what our students are potentially going through with these theories. And then now being back in grad school and coming into a new space at Ohio State, I found that there wasn't really a space for mixed students, and it was actually just last week that through the Multicultural Center I hosted our first meeting. There used to be a student organization that died out, but our first meeting that was hosted by the office for mixed students, and just seeing all the students who showed up just to like vent and be with other people who identified similarly, like that's absolutely affirming of finding those spaces and creating those spaces for any identities really, and that's not just along racial and ethnic lines, but any religious organizations, and with sexual orientation and the LGBT community. People want that space, and I think that we as graduate students and professionals can look back on our experiences to see when and where those spaces were important for us, and to help create those now.
I completely agree. I think that it's really important to create spaces for students of color on campus. And I know here at Michigan State, I was really challenged, and I felt very marginalized last year because I didn't feel like there was that space for me. I didn't feel like there were people surrounding me, like faculty and staff members, who understood my experiences. And so it was really hard for me because I was coming from, a place where I felt supported by my community, and I felt like there was a really strong presence of API students on my campus, and so, or on my undergraduate campus. And so coming to Michigan State and not finding that was really hard. And so actually, honestly, when I felt like in my undergrad years, because I was surrounded by and I was really, growing up, I was pretty surrounded by a very, monolithic or very Asian community, and so I didn't really ever feel challenged to think about my identity as deeply as maybe if I had been surrounded by or just in a different space. And so I think that coming to Michigan State and not understanding a lot of these things was really hard for me. But then I find myself now thinking that this is like really important. So, you know, I'm trying to like create some new initiatives and things on campus that will really help graduate students, because for undergrads there's APIKC, which is like the student organization for Asian American students on campus, but then there's no graduate student association. And so last Friday we just had our first like meeting with a couple grad students from different departments to hopefully start this grad association, and I'm really excited about that. And we also don't have any representation on our graduate like council, and so I'm hoping that we can have that kind of kick-started this year as well, so we can kind of develop more space and more community on this campus.
I feel like someone should make a research study on Asian Americans in California and then when they leave California, because that's something that has, like, that's what I am, and that's what I feel like I've heard multiple times throughout this like book club, like in previous months as well. I could do that. Anyways, I think that Stephen and Carol bring up really great points in terms of like being able to provide spaces for individuals to bond and to hear to be in solidarity with one another. It sounds like you had a really great program, Stephen. I'm excited for you. Is that going to be continuing in the future?
Yeah, so the way our office is structured is that there is a professional staff person for each identity group, so different racial and ethnic groups, and then one for women's initiatives and one for LGBT students. So as a part-time person, I suppose I'm the person for mixed stuff now, which kind of concerns me once I leave this space. But yeah, for now it's at least going to be a monthly meeting, and we have space reserved for that. And then I'm just hoping that the students will take it from there and start up that organization that died out again, or start a new thing and create their own space. I'm just trying to facilitate that now and get them to take the initiative on it.
So when I first, everyone, hi, sorry I'm late. I was at a meeting, but when I first opened up this chapter, I was like, oh, you know, I don't really know much about this. I'm very, like, I think my family, we've been always saying like we have a very single ethnic line of legacy. We're Koreans like through and through. And so when I first cracked this, I was like, I wonder like how this is gonna resonate with me. I think my first interest in multiracial identity came from my niece, who is Korean and also white American, half. And so I'm like, man, I really gotta brush up on this stuff so I can learn more about how she's gonna grow up in this kind of identity. But actually, it just struck me. I wonder if you guys can tell me more about this, but I've never thought of it this way. But am I multi-ethnic? And that question comes from like having grown up in Latin America, where I was born in Paraguay. My parents are Koreans, and I've been in, so I'm dual citizen from Korea and Paraguay, and I highly identify with both cultures. And so I don't know if that really constitutes as multi-ethnic. I've always just considered myself as international rather than. I'm not sure. Do you guys have any thoughts on like what multi-ethnic, does that constitute as that or not? And when I was applying to college, there was this one grant that was called Hispanic Grant. And I remember the admissions people fighting amongst themselves to whether or not they should give me the grant, because I was born in Paraguay. I lived there most of my life for 17 years. But they're like, he's obviously Asian, like he's not eligible for this. So, I think that was one of the more initial stages of me thinking like, okay, like, who am I questions to, not necessarily initial, but one of the transitioning times for me. But multi-ethnic, I've never considered myself as that, and I don't know if that's what the term means. Any thoughts?
So I would say one term that I've heard in relation to the multiracial, mixed, multi-ethnic community is like someone who considers themselves like third culture or like a third culture kid, where you grow up in a different culture that's different from your racial or ethnic background, or that's different from your parents' background and where they grew up. So I would say maybe that, but also you can identify with whatever term you want to identify with too. It's definitely a self-identification thing too. And the interesting thing about that scholarship you just brought up is like just categories in general of races, and then the one ethnic question is, are you Latino, Hispanic usually? And people conflate the two of like, okay, we think that there's only maybe black or white Latinos, but yeah, I think that if someone marked Native American or Asian, like that complicates people's perception of who is allowed to check that Latino box.
I wonder if like TCK, third culture kid, is a classification under multi-ethnic. I'm not sure like what exactly the definition of multi-ethnic is. I think multiracial is very more specific. Like that's a legal census of who's who, right? But ethnic seems to be more open for interpretation. Does it matter? I don't know. Just questions.
So I feel like I'm with Steven on this one in the sense that like at the end of the day you identify what you feel is most congruent to you. And I'm also now considering the definition of multi-ethnic, because hearing what you just shared, like I don't know if I've ever seen it defined now that I'm like going through all my experiences, and I think that's just like, I wonder if that's almost done purposefully in the sense that like because it's hard to define, we just don't define it, and because it means different things to different individuals, we don't define it. And I think I am processing this part a lot, because as soon as you said like what does it actually mean, I thought back to like the LGBTQ spectrum, and folks like always have, so exactly what does it mean to be a pan? So by your definition, do I fit or do I not? But then by your definition, maybe I do fit. And I'm just thinking about all the other identities within the LGBTQ community and how there are like these different schools of thought around, nope, it has to fit exactly, and then no, identity is about claiming who you are and empowering yourself. And so that's why I said I think I agree with what Steven said before, like in terms of like at the end of the day, like maybe there are like general like guidelines, and I put guidelines in quotes, guidelines around what it means to be a particular identity. And I think identity is something that's intensely personal and that in many ways we define for ourselves. And I think the need for categories helps build community, and sometimes they end up being ways they become too restricting for folks. And so I think just processing a lot, like that was like my immediate reaction to you sharing.
Yeah, I like what you have to say, Mindy, because I think that as an international student / professional, you know, like a lot of this stuff doesn't resonate with me. Like, and even a lot of the things that as we were going through grad school and learning about racial identities and all this, it seemed very America-centric. And you know, even the book is titled Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And so I know that this isn't strictly for me, but you know, I think what Stephen was saying about different spaces for different people. You know, I don't know if if the theories that we hold in higher education really are inclusive of, you know, I wonder if it's mainly for Americans. I don't know. But like the Asian development theories for Asians, like I was just like, yeah, I mean, I know I can see this kind of in my life, but there are a lot of factors that I think it's not considering. And maybe there's a study that I completely missed, or some kind of theory that I completely missed during grad school that focused more on international intersectionalities. But I personally haven't seen much of that. If anyone does have more resources on that, I'd be happy to read more on that. Or just if you guys have any thoughts on that in general.
I think, so your point makes me think a lot about chapter 5, which also I think, so I think the need to talk about how even then within the larger community there are different experiences, and I think chapter 5, which is incredibly, incredibly short, which I was slightly annoyed about, but also acknowledging, like, I think sometimes it can be difficult to talk about, you know, even if, let's say, hypothetically, folks were to identify all as APIA, like, that means different things to different folks because it's the identity doesn't exist in isolation. It is informed by other identities, and in your case, like, other experiences, specifically that of not growing up in the United States, and that is also an identity, and that is also a way in which your experience has been shaped. And then also, it's kind of funny, as you were talking about theories, and Virginia can attest to this, I always critique theories as I'm learning them, because I think they're created within a very specific cultural bound, and a lot of times my critique is we should really consider the intersections between culture and student development and how that looks different. And I think that's really something that I got from your point, which is like, because the culture is different, your experiences were fundamentally different, and so the theories don't really fit as they should because your context is different as well than what the theory is situated in. So, but I think that just raises larger questions around, like, to what extent do we sometimes overgeneralize about the community and not really think about how individuals can share a similar identity and yet have such distinctly different experiences and understandings.
Yeah, I think you know, it's not like I'm like, well, I don't belong to the Asian American community, because I don't feel that way. Like, I feel very accepted, like, especially when I go to the NASPA Asian KC, like, you know, I felt like I fit right in, right? It's my question for theories and those kinds of things, like, well, you know, I am in American higher education, like, is it, I think I'm asking too much to be more like the entire world. the theories cannot possibly capture the entire experience of the entire world. You know, it's impossible. And so I understand that it has to be more specific so that the data is more specific as well, and we get more accurate information. But I think I'm voicing some of me and some of my colleagues who are also internationals' frustration that, you know, it's not necessarily comprehensive in some ways. But I thoroughly enjoy being with you guys.
So then, so I'm recognizing we have about 15 minutes left. And moving forward and touching a little bit on Chapter 5. And because I think it fits well with what Danny has just shared, I'm curious how folks reacted to some of the stories and experiences, or maybe some things that people considered as they were reading through some of the experiences that were shared by various individuals throughout the chapter.
Could you ask that again, please?
Sorry. So kind of moving forward, Danny, respecting how you just shared your story, and then also looking a lot at Chapter 5 is also similarly folks sharing stories about, some of the complications around what happens when you begin to talk about intersections of identity and intersectionality. So I just wanted to open the floor first to see if folks had like initial reactions to some of the stories, or if there were like immediate thoughts that they had as they were hearing some of the stories that folks shared about their experiences within being APIA and also identifying as LGBTQ.
So I really appreciated two of the quotes from Joshua Moon Johnson. One of them was on page 111 when he talked about, he says, I recognize what it feels like to identify with a community but not necessarily feel included within it. And I think that goes a lot of what we just talked about with Danny, like you feel like you're part of APIKC and you feel this community, but like where does that inclusion happen with other things you identify with? I would say the same for me as a biracial person. It's like there's, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure how to articulate what I'm thinking related to that, but like, yeah, finding community, because I definitely feel community like with you all and stuff, which brings me to the quote about, it was something like having people who understand us, and like I know they understand me and my identity much more than others do, and that was about like seeking professional advice or mentorship or just support from professionals. And like we probably talk about this every time we have these meetings, but like you all are part of that for me, definitely. Like, yeah, we're all over Region 4 in the Midwest somewhere, but like having those people even that I see once a year at NASPA or that I see once a month on a screen, like I feel like you all understand more about me than some of my friends here who we don't have these conversations, and I don't get to be as authentic with my identity or just talk about those experiences with it. So I definitely really appreciated those two quotes from him about that.
So I guess building off that point, thank you for sharing, Stephen, that you said in terms of the quote really resonating, and I also really resonated with that quote saying like, I recognize what it feels like to identify with a community but not necessarily feel included within it. In what ways do you feel that we as either faculty members or practitioners or however we choose to move forward with our careers can help build bridges so that there can be an increased space or understanding within communities to build some of those bridges to better support students who may be feeling like, it's not that I necessarily don't feel like I'm a part of community, simply I'm not sure the level of understanding that is there because of other intersecting identities that I may have.
I mean, I think on the most basic level, just being present in different spaces on your campus, right? So that's something that's really important to me, is just making it known that I'm here and that I'm supportive, right? So that students see me and they don't see me in just an Asian American context. They see me in other spaces, you know, with other affinity groups and just other places around campus. So they know like, oh, okay, that might be someone who I can relate to or that I can talk to, who will support me. I think it's amazing that, you know, that, so it's Raja, right, is talking about like the fact that they're now the director of an LGBT resource center, right? And I don't have any statistics. I don't know how many people of color are doing that, but I'm guessing it's not a ton. And so just for the students on that campus, how wonderful that must be to know that they have somebody who is probably constantly thinking about people of color within the queer spectrum, and their experiences, and making sure that they're included in everything, or that their needs are being met. That's it. Just the basics, I think, sometimes are the things that, like, they seem so obvious, but if we're not doing them or it's not happening on our campus, then maybe our students are not being served in the best way, just because we're not doing those basic things. And not just us, I mean, obviously the other administrators on our campuses.
Yeah, going with the basics too, like Augustana, which is where I'm at right now, is at a transitional period where I work in the Office of International Student Life, but we have an Office of Multicultural Student Life. And we have one director and one assistant director. And that's it for the entire campus. And so it's pretty small group. And you know, the director is we asked if we could do some workshops to address like biases and to educate the general campus more about how to be inclusive. But she's like, well, we need to focus more on actually like meeting the needs of the students of color here at Augustana. But for me, like, I think that needs of students is good, but if we're not reaching out to the students of color here as well and educating them about what privilege is, what oppression is, what, you know, all these things are, then for those students who are constantly thinking about their identity as students of color and all this, like they don't feel like we really care about how they interact with white people. So yeah, I think the basics needs to be covered, and it's so basic, but at the same time, it's so hard to do. And when it's a small school like this, like we have very limited resources, it's hard to do as well. So I'm not sure what the office is going to do, but here's to the hope.
I resonate with you, and it's not just about teaching Asian American students how to interact with white people, but it's also how do you navigate all these systems in your life, because you're going to encounter them as you start your career, as you try to move up the ladder, as you try to just live life as as a marginalized person. So I feel like that's so crucial piece. Just wanted to add that extra.
I think to go off that, to build off of what you said, Peter, is how do you navigate multiple, what's it called? Multiple intersections of being a diverse student. So the what is that word? I'm totally blanking. Sorry, it's Friday. But of marginalizations, right? So the chapter is talking about being a Desi American, and then as well as a queer person. And so to have the interactions of a queer person of color, right? And so to be there for students in order to let them know about, well, yes, you may be marginalized in this sense, but then to also have to navigate another layer of marginalization is important to kind of recognize that not all students have it easy. Okay.
That and there are privileged identities too, and how do they perpetuate marginalization of other communities and identities? That's, I think, very important to talk about.
So I recognize there's only 5 minutes left, and I don't necessarily want to pose a new question because I don't want to cut folks off. So I'll just open the space really quickly. Does anybody have any last-minute comments or reactions they want to share? Maybe a particular response that maybe either Virginia and I didn't ask specifically that you would like to share?
Go ahead, Stephen.
Okay. I was just going to say, I appreciate that these chapters are even in this book, to begin with, and that we can discuss these other identities that intersect with the API community. I think that shows on the part of the editors and authors and everything that, that's needed and important to discuss. So, yeah, I just want to throw that out there. It's definitely good for us to continue to do that.
My question is unrelated. I just wanted to know if any of you are coming to the 4 East conference that's happening. All sad face. No.
When and where is that?
It's in Schaumburg, Illinois, which is where I live. It could not be more convenient. It's a suburb of Chicago. Anyone? No.
So as the region rep, I should be there, but I can't. I have too many things going on and not enough money. I apologize.
It's back-to-back with Ash this year, and I'm going to be traveling to Denver for that, so can't make it back in time for the region conference.
Gotcha. Has anybody been before?
I went last year. It was in Columbus. They had about probably 300, almost 325 amount of people, and they said that when it's in Chicagoland, it's larger. So maybe 400 you might expect.
Did you like it?
Yeah, I liked it. I like the National more because there are more people there. But I liked learning about Columbus, but it had good sessions as well.
Okay. Well, if anything changes, and if any of you can make it, let me know. I'll show you around the very exciting town of Schaumburg, Illinois.
Do you want me to send you all the APIKC materials and you can stand at our table and tell people about our awesome book club and stuff like that?
Maybe. This is my first time going to like a big NASPA thing, so I'm pretty excited.
Just a real quick question, like, when is it again? Like, you said November, but what day? Because I just tried looking it up and I'm lost.
I think 8th through the 10th, something like that.
Okay, thank you.
You gonna come home for that?
We'll see. We'll see.
Okay, folks. So with that, thank you all for participating this month in our book club. Carol, I think you're next. Oh, no, she signed up. Okay. So we'll reach out to them individually. But yeah, so thank you for participating. I really appreciated hearing from all of you. This is always a highlight for my month, even though sometimes I'm rushing till the very last minute to finish the chapters. So yeah, Virginia, did you want to take another awkward group picture before we sign off? Virginia, you're on mute. Okay, there you go.
I feel like we should like have like an animal or something, right? Like a bear or like I don't know.
I got a new office, and the bear is up higher now. So if I stand up or something.
Okay.
Place myself. But y'all have to unmute yourselves, because otherwise the little microphone thing is covering all your faces.
Oh, I didn't know that happened. Okay.
Right. I'm gonna take the picture.
Oh my god, this is so awkward. Okay. Virginia, unmute yourself.
She taking it yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'm like, do I need to keep smiling?
Yeah.
I'm like, can I stop now?
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good weekend.
You too.